Welcome to Miss V, the Storyteller podcast. You guys, I always say this, but it's so true. I always try to find the best. I want people to come on that's going to inspire us, that's going to give us inspiration, to help us, to educate us. And I have found someone who is going to educate us today. I am so thrilled. This is a subject that I love and hold dear to my heart. I'm not going to tell you yet what it is, but it is something that I absolutely love. So, my guest, Damon Taylor, he's going to tell you a little bit about himself and then we'll get into it, you guys. So, Damon, please tell my listeners about yourself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that introduction. My name is Damon, born and raised in Harlem, New York City, and currently I live in Darlington, South Carolina. I'm father of two boys, 11, well, actually about to be 11, 10, and 12, pardon me, Kenny and Joshua. And, basically I work as a CEO. I have my own restaurant consulting business. I'm a caterer, chef, and also an author. I wrote my first book this year. So, wearing a lot of hats and, hopefully I'm wearing them well, but yeah, I'm definitely a busy person, but fortunate to do what I do. I'll say that.
Well, Damon forgot to mention something else that he does, and that is what we're going to talk about today. Damon is a genealogist, and
And I
you
left
all
that out.
know I love history. I love finding out how things came to life, and I love learning about my past. You all know I've told you one time before, one of my favorite shows is Finding Your Roots. I know it's for entertainment purposes, but I love to see people when they go back and they learn about their history. And that is something that Damon does. He finds out. But here's a little different twist. Now, if you follow me and you know I had someone else on the show who was also a genealogist, and she did my father's side of the family and told me some things about my father's side of the family. But Damon, he has a little bit of a twist on the type of genealogy that he does. So I'm so thrilled. Damon, so what story are you going to share with us today?
Well, I did leave out genealogy is definitely a passion of mine, as well as a profession of mine. It's developed into that, but it developed into that from just being involved with family. So that's the story, just basically a family story. And, growing up, I had my grand aunts, my great grand uncles, and, they would tell us family stories. They would take us to the family reunions. We go look at the picture books and, just look at family members and tell stories about, oh yeah, this is Uncle, Roy, this is Uncle, this is your great grandfather, Doja Cannon, you know what I'm saying? Things like that, your great grandfather. And we just had these stories, and it was something that I loved as far as taking time to be with family, but I don't think I understood the importance of it, right? I think I took a lot of things like that for granted. So something pivotal, something that happened that really made me take this a lot more serious was an incident that happened here in Darlington, where I live, and my father's family's from out here. And we have a family cemetery. So in the course of me doing genealogy research on my own family, trying to discover more about my personal line, and I'm out at the family cemetery, I saw some cousins, and the cousins of mine just so happened to be there to, from a cemetery association, right, that they resurrected, that our elders had started. So when I come to find out about what happened with this situation, what actually happened was that a lady had claimed that the family cemetery was on her property.
Oh,
And her making this claim, she was trying to say that she was paying taxes on it and that she had to, basically figure out what was going on. So our family went deeper because they already had records, and they went to the courthouse, found the records of the ownership, showed that our ancestors had purchased the property. That actually changed the narrative that was going on with our family church. There was a whole narrative that the Hoffmeyer family had donated the property to our families, but come to find out, these things were all purchased by our ancestors. So in the course of me doing my family genealogy and it being maybe more like a hobby, it became a lot more pertinent, especially in regards to our family and cemetery and the cemetery association. So, that kind of pushed it into overdrive, as well as just things that I started learning along the way, because I always had the oral tradition of my family having American Indian history, American Indian lineage. And I thought I knew a lot about American Indian history, but I really didn't. And I started to learn a lot more. And as I started to go down that rabbit hole, it just really, everything about it just fascinated. The way you say you're fascinated by it, I'm probably like double, triple. You know what I'm saying? I love it. I could do it all day, all night. Sometimes you got to step back because the ancestors, they tug on you and you start to kind of even relive because you're like, oh, wow, like I'm them, like you see how you're them today, but it really only comes with knowing, genealogy is the key. So I'll land it right there.
Well, listen, my journey wasn't quite like you all as far as the land and as far as the cemetery and all that thing. But our family is like your family. We've always gotten together. My mother's side of the family, growing up, we always spent time with her side of the family. Family reunions, we would have family reunions. Her family was so huge. My mom was number 22 out of 22 children. And because her family was so huge, her parents um, decided that they would get together at least twice a year. So we would have family reunions, and then we would have our Christmas Pollyanna. And that's when everybody gets gathered together for Christmas. So ever since I've been in the world, that is something that we had always done with my mom. But growing up, I noticed some differences in my mother's family because some people look suspect. And so they looked a little different. And there was aunties, a couple of aunties and an uncle, and we was like, what's going on here? And as I got older, I really noticed some differences, even with my mother. And so one of my cousins, well, she's really not a cousin. She's no, we call her auntie, but she's really my cousin because she was the daughter of one of my mother's oldest sisters. So by the time my mom came along, that sister had gone on, had kids, and moved, and she had what we would refer to as our aunt, which was technically our cousin. She was raised as a sister and not a niece because she was older than some of the kids. If that makes sense to you, she was older than my mom, my uncle, and my next auntie. She was older than them, so we kind of call her auntie.
Of course.
So family reunions, we getting together, and at one point, it was really bothering her that the family wasn't coming together the way it used to come together. And so one year she said, I am going to trace our family tree.
Okay.
And she did that. And so when we went to the family reunion, she revealed about our family.
Nice.
And let's just say some people were not happy. Some people was a little bit upset about the findings because we have been told that our my grandfather, my grandmother, on their certificates it says mulatto. So we assumed that it was, my mom said that it was Indian, that we were part Indian and part Black. That wasn't the case. It was white. And so because the story had went on so long, people were shocked and like, what do you mean? And it was a great grandmother and not a great grandfather, because we just assumed that it was a grandfather. But it wasn't. It was a grandmother. And so the family was like, what? So that kind of like birthed it in me to find out a lot more about my family, because they did not do a lot of talking, but I was one of those children that asked a lot of questions. I will always sit with older people and ask questions. I have always been that way. I would sit with my aunties for hours and we'll just talk and they would just pour into me. And because one time I called and I was like, why is my mama like that? And
Yeah.
she was like, baby, your mama, she's the baby and she's spoiled. I said, well, y'all need to stop spoiling her because this is ridiculous, kind of thing. So I would call my aunties and that's how it was. And then I realized that I only knew about a portion of it. I don't know anything about my grandmother, my mother's mother, because she died when my mom was probably about between 2 and 4. So I knew nothing about her. I didn't know anything about her family. And so like now I'm like, I really want to know. I wanted to know about my father's side of the family because it was land involved, ownerships of businesses and all that stuff. So I got some of that done and I got to find out about my great 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 grandfather, Jeremiah, who was a landowner, who was an entrepreneur. I mean, I love that, but I wanted to know my mother's side of the family. So that is my journey now. And so when I found you, I was like somebody else who has that passion and that love for just finding. I think it gives us such a sense of pride when we go back and we look at what our ancestors have gone through to make a space for us so
Yeah.
that it won't be as hard because they went through some stuff. And I always say, Lord, I don't think I would have made it. I was created at the right timing because back then I don't know if I would have made it
I
based
think
on
you would.
something. Oh, I'm glad you think so. Well, I know there's a lot of people out there saying there's no way I would have been able to make it back then, but I guess in a sense, if that's all you knew, then we probably would have made it if you look at it that way. So Damon, when you went on this journey, was there anything in particular that shocked you? Or was there anything that said, oh my God, because like we're finding out that it wasn't Indian, it was something else, that was a shocker to us based on the stories we have been told. So was
Yeah.
there anything that shocked you when you started to look into your family?
I think the thing that shocked me personally was the the understanding that there wasn't as many Europeans in certain areas that it would seem that they were. That shocked me. So with that being said, that ties into the white passing,
Hmm.
right? There was a lot of white passing, so that's probably the other thing. Those things are probably just as connected. So, it's too many moments in history where, you know, it would seem like the quote unquote white man, I have to air quote it when I say it because I don't believe in those terms. These are terms that we've been conditioned to use,
Hmm.
but they really don't apply to any real group of people at all. So, it's been used and we can accept it as a term, but again, those quote unquote white people though, they they weren't able to come in here into America and establish the foothold that they could establish without the help of the first indigenous people that they first encountered, right? So the narrative that comes in, like they came in with the smallpox blankets and they killed off half, and then they had the wars, and then you hear about the wars, and you're like, okay, well, they died in the wars, and that makes you start to think, well, yeah, they just wiped out these Indians, and but when I learned about something that was pivotal to my personal family history, and that was the Tuscarora War, right? And that's the largest Indian war in North Carolina, right? History. When you look into the background of that war and who was fighting in the battles, you'll see that in like the pivotal final battles, you had 30 whites, 900 South Carolina Indians, as well as other Tuscarora Indians. They allied them and banded them together, and they fought against the Tuscarora Indians. And that's who actually ultimately wound up defeating the Tuscarora. So it wasn't just this wave of colonists, this wave of Europeans and whites that came and and got rid of the or subdued. Let's even say that, because that's better what happened. That subdued the Tuscarora. It was other Indians that did this. Now, these other Indians ultimately, they assimilate into white society. They now become whites. They pass, and you have families like the Gibson family. That's a prominent one. You can look up a person named Gideon Gibson. That's a great one to look up. Gideon Gibson, Darlington, South Carolina. The family passed as white, but they also were brought up. They had something called the Negro Act here in South Carolina, where they would execute someone basically if they found out that they were a Negro, and they were going to use this act to execute Gideon Gibson. But he took, the pretty much the state house to task and was like, well, look, I have as much British ancestry as you, because there was a mixed ancestry that would come with these American Indians that were fighting alongside the British, or fighting alongside the French, or fighting alongside the Spanish. So it's just, I think that was the part, again, that was the most shocking, was really learning how these terms were used. Also, again, learning that there just weren't as many Europeans and weren't as many whites here to begin with as it may have seemed. I think that's the biggest shocker. You know what I'm saying? Honestly.
What do you think the reason why we think it's so many is because of the way history was recorded? Because it does reflect that when overall, the only way we would know these things is from people like you and historians and genealogy and all that goes back and actually really look at it. But for someone like me, just overall being taught in school or being taught, it appears that way. It
Yes.
appears as though, the whites came in, they took over the land, they turned on the Indians, and then, they brought the slaves over, and the slaves started to do all these things. But that's what we've been told. That's the things that we've been taught. Those are the things that we've seen. So how does media play a part in shaping the narrative? I mean, how does it, with our races and classes and all that, how do you think that plays a part?
It plays the largest part. Definitely. The movies, the depictions, there's a person named Iron Eyes Cody, right? So I don't know if you're familiar. They had the crying Indian, and they threw out trash on the ground, and they had the Indian, and he was standing there, he had a tear fall from his eye. I don't know if you ever saw a commercial that they had on TV with this Indian. He he went around. Jimmy Carter, took him around. This guy is not American Indian at all. On no part of his lineage, his mother, his father, his family is from Italy. He's Sicilian from Italy.
Wow.
And this is a person along with others, because have you ever heard of the term spaghetti Western? I had to learn to see. And don't get me wrong, I don't want, because that's the thing. I don't want anybody else who's listening to think like I just came out, I'm just some type of guru. No, I had to re-educate myself. I learned the same indoctrinated things that you did, because my mother told me, one of the first things I can remember, my mom said, you had that red complexion like an Indian. That's what she told me, but like I was like first memory. I might have been like 4 or 5 or something like that. You get what I'm saying? So I didn't learn about being black and all this until society. You get what I'm saying? I
Mm-hmm.
had to learn this outside. So I had to re-educate myself. But when it comes to like stuff like, okay, if you're gonna look at the America, it's so much that you have to re-educate yourself with. Because the first thing is that they have things like spaghetti westerns, right? Thank you. I almost lost my thoughts. Spaghetti westerns. If you're familiar with that term, I always heard it. Like, what's a spaghetti western? I didn't get it. What's a spaghetti western? Somebody explained it to me. They said they called it spaghetti westerns because they had Italians playing all the actors, and that's a fact.
Wow.
That's a fact. If you look up these old Western movies that we was watching, they were all Italian actors that played in the movie. The original Django, if you look back at like a movie like that, they had a quote unquote white guy, blonde hair, playing Django. This guy, I think his name is Nero is his last name, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's Nero. But he played the original Django. Okay, so think about that even. Like a pale
Yeah,
guy, white guy playing the original Django. But he was Italian, along with the rest of the other actors in cast, because that is who portrayed those movies, was Italians. It was never the actual American Indians, not never, but rarely, if ever, the actual American Indians. So now when you go and you take a look at, let's just take all of the American Indian tribes up and down the East Coast, right? So the North and the Southeast, it's the Pequot, the Shinnecox, the Pamunkey, the Lumbee, right? You go through all of these people, they're not being represented. You know, you're getting people that's not even from America representing who these people are. And then they might take another person who's labeled black, who actually has the lineage. Let's take like a Della Reese, for example, somebody like that, for example, and cast her as African slave or something like that, the Negro slave. And see what I'm saying? So now these images, the media, it's by far the worst. It's by far the worst. And something with my young boys, since they've been young, is something that I try to reinforce. Like, we have to do better when it comes to images. You know, if I can I add one more thing? I don't want to
Oh,
go too much.
sure. Oh, no, sure.
This this happened with my oldest son, and it really was poignant to me. He's getting homeschooled. I'm homeschooling him. He was in a program at that time, K-12. You know, just for the record, I'm not getting paid. You know, saying my K-12, but he was with K-12, and they had his teacher, and she was supposed to be teaching him about American Indians. It's about Cherokee Indians, Catawba Indians, and you know that's based in South Carolina history, real prominent. We so happen personally to have that lineage, Catawba and Cherokee lineage. The teacher goes and takes pictures of Plains Indians with teepees and, you know, with war bonnets here, and takes all images, drawings of them, and puts those on her slides that she shows along with with the stories about the Cherokee. Cherokees, their attire is not war bonnets. Catawbas and Cherokees, they don't live in teepees. Okay, every Indian does not have the same attire, the same abode. You know what I'm saying? It's the monolithic thing that the Indian has become, and it disappointed me that happened. But I was able to go to my son and say, "Well, hey, I have these books. Let's look at these books right here, and I can show you actual Catawba Indians. You can see the actual Cherokee Indians, the actual people." Because to me, it was a shame that the teacher wasn't able to do this. You get what I'm saying?
But in her defense, that's probably what she was taught and what she learned. Because, like we said, what was written back in those days probably had a hidden agenda. They wanted to make a certain race look better than everyone else. And it's so funny that you say that, because my mom loves the Western. She grew up on the Western. She watches the Western. She can tell you like the back of their hands. And one day I was visiting her and I was happening to look up and I saw Burt Reynolds as playing an Indian, just like you were saying. He was playing an Indian. And there were some other stars that they made look like Indians instead of just having or hiring real Indians to play the role. They had them. So that is so true. I also wanted to touch on what you said about passing. Of course, I love Finding Your Roots. I love the show. Again, it's for entertainment purposes, but a lot of the stuff you can learn so much from watching this particular show. And I was watching it, and there was a particular star. Um, I think his name is Henry Gates Jr. He finds celebrities, and then he goes and he finds out about their past. And there was one particular star, and I don't remember who it was. And come to find out, one of her ancestors was passing for an Indian. And she couldn't understand why. And he was explaining to her why. And I thought about it. I said to myself, I'm sure back in the day, a lot of people passed for a whole lot of different things, like blacks passed for white so that they can, stay alive. I'm sure a lot of people passed for other things. So I just thought that was ironic that you mentioned that, and I remember seeing that on the show. But because of, I call it whitewashing and, washing out all those different things, because of that, why do you think it is so important that we educate our kids, we ourselves, and not leave it so much up to history or school and those things, that we sit down with them and we talk about it ourselves?
Because you and your family are way more invested than the school system, than the teachers in the school. You have some great teachers, you have some great schools, you know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, they're not as invested in who you are, where you come from. Um, if they're if they're teaching about blacks and whites, right, and this is the system that we've been indoctrinated into, right? Those two terms, they denationalize groups of people. They disenfranchise groups of people. What they do is they prop up a system that is empowering uh, a, a certain class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's just like a new age caste system. You get what I'm saying? So for me, it's like, okay, who else could teach? Who else can deconstruct that better, or who else would be willing to deconstruct that? Would it be me or the school system? You get what I'm saying? Would it be me or the government? You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I feel like that's where us as people, we have to take the onus when it comes to so many things. It's so many times it's like, well, when is the government going to come in and do this? When is this person going to come in and do this? And it's like, man, like, we got a lot. You know what I'm saying? Like, we got a lot that we can come
Yeah.
together and do as a group, as a whole. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. I got you.
You
Yeah, I
know?
just think it's for me, I think it's so important that we educate our children and nieces and nephews, because I'm a storyteller. So I believe in the power of stories. I believe that when you share stories, it really connects you with your children. Your children, they get to know about you and their history. And I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the things that we have to do as parents, as educators, is when we do talk to our children, we can tell them about our history, but tell it in a way that doesn't exudes hate. Because of course we've all been through a whole lot of different things. Even with the way the world is right now, sometimes you can feel a certain way because of something that you saw in the media or whatever. But it's so important that we don't pour that into our children. We give them the facts, we give them what we know to be true, but
Mm-hmm.
not out of to make them want to hate a particular group of people.
Yeah, I want to that point. That's why we need to strip so much of the victimhood,
Hmm.
the victimization, pardon me, that's the word I wanted to use, the victimization that comes from these curriculums and things in school. Some people I might not be popular with everybody what I'm about to say, but it's true. And it's true based on what I've learned. And, when you hear some quote unquote white people and they come out and they say, man, my family didn't own slaves. And you know what I'm saying? Like, why? I know it's hard. I know it's hard. I know it's hard. But you know what's crazy? It's very true. A lot of these families, they didn't own no slaves. They didn't have no, they didn't have that power. They didn't have that ability. A lot of them were slaves. A lot of their folks were slaves. A lot of their family didn't get here until fresh off a boat in like the early 1900s. You see what I'm saying? Like they didn't really have nothing to do with it. So what happens is they start to wear a certain type of false bravado. There's a false bravado that comes from that. Oh, I enslaved your ancestors out there. No, you didn't do nothing. See, like that got to get stripped away. So that when that gets stripped away, now it's like, well, who are you for real? You know what I'm saying? So then you can really deal with a person without the hate. You see what I'm
Hmm.
saying? The hate comes from me thinking your ancestors enslaved my ancestors and some of it is just not true. We got to understand there's people that look like us, skin folk, that was enslaving other You know what I'm saying?
I
Remember,
can
I told you
believe,
these folks was passive.
and I can believe that, right? And I can believe that. Again, going back to the show, there were some celebrities that were African American who, that when they go back and trace their lineages, they were not slaves. They were not
Mm-hmm.
enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And I can probably believe that if I hadn't talked to you so much before when we had our meet and greet, I might not agree, but I thought about some of the things that you share with me, because we talked for like almost an hour and a half, 2 hours. I had to get off because this man was still going on and on and on, y'all. I was like, listen, I got stuff to do. But anyway,
But I'm glad you
but
checked out what I sent you. I'm glad you checked it out.
I can see, I can probably see it because again, if we strip off what we've been taught and programmed to believe and we think about the whole picture, there were probably some people, some white people who didn't own slaves. They probably couldn't afford to own them, you know.
Not at
And
all.
I can
At
see
all.
that, I can see that all classes of people could have easily been enslaved, just like the Europeans that
Absolutely.
came over that was indentured servants. They were slaves until they worked it off. So they were. So we don't want to forget about
And all of them couldn't work it off because
right,
that's the part that they would overextend their indentures. Their indentures would become lifetime indentures. You
right.
know what I'm saying?
So again, that goes back to knowing your history and then sharing what you know, the true things about what you see, and not allowing and just allowing like the school or other
Mm-hmm.
people to educate your kids. And sometimes it just takes you sitting down and reading something and learning something. Like me, I'm learning, I'm trying to find out, I'm talking to people like you and my other guest. I talked to her about some things, and I look at the show and I try to find out things and learn things about our history so that I'm able to share it in a way that can empower us and not make us feel less than,
There you go.
because we
There you
come
go.
from some amazing people, and if we
And
just take the time to learn and then share it, it will boost the kids that's coming up. They won't
yes.
grow up in hate and disliking different races and all that. They will grow up in love and knowing who they are so that other people can't bring them down
Yes,
because they
indeed.
know whose they are. So
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
oh, see, y'all know I'm loving this. I am just loving this. So as a father, how important is it, the father role in the family to their child? How important is that as far as, you know, helping our kids to know who they are? Because mamas, you know,
Mhm.
we do a lot of the raising. Not saying that fathers don't, but how important do you feel as a father raising two sons?
It's extremely important. I didn't have my father around and available as much as I needed him and wanted him to be. He passed away. I was like 13. Passed away on Father's Day. He had complications of tuberculosis, right? But before he passed away, he started to get close to me, right? He started to get close to my life. He started coming around and trying to make a difference. And one thing he told me was that he regretted not being around when I was younger. And that was like one of the most powerful things that ever told me. So it's like him not being around, you can't get that back, which I learned a lot. And that's how I live my life. Like, man, those days, anytime I get with my boys, like I treasure it. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Any father, I would expect the same. Mothers, understand that this is important for fathers and for sons because what I'll say is that there's things that, I'm not with my son's mother now, but there's things that she just can't teach them. There's things she can't tell them. There's things that they can only learn from me. There's things that I'll only tolerate that, her as the mother won't tolerate and that they have to go through as boys. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think, we definitely live in a world where there's a lot of blurred lines. I'm not
Mhm.
here to offend anybody, but I think these blurred lines are very problematic, you know what I'm saying? Because it what does that do for those who are trying to stand, who trying to stand flat-footed in what who they are, and so who do they learn from? right? So they need that real masculine, demeanor, because I think it can't just get lost in everything is toxic masculinity, right? Everything is just horrible about being a man. Yet, you know, even the women who got to certain places, they needed a strong man who had certain masculine characteristics. So I just think it is very important. I might have got a little triggered some of my comment, but it's just because I hear certain things when it comes to men and just being a man with your sons. You know what I'm saying? And just like it seems like they're not. It seems like it's not as appreciated as when I grew up. I don't know if you feel that and see that. You know
Well,
what I'm
yeah,
saying? So,
I agree with you. I agree with you to a certain extent because of the way that women have been treated and some things that we've gone through. Sometimes, we do give a negative light on men, but it's so important that we don't do that. Because just because we've gone through something doesn't mean that all men are that way. It could be just that one. So, I agree with you as far as, I think it's so important that men, especially men that have boys, that you do share and that you do. I'm a storyteller, so I think you should share stories. Tell them about yourself. Tell them about the things that you've gone through and how you dealt with it, whether it was the right or the wrong way, so that they understand that you're not perfect, you're going to mess up, and it helps them become better men. I think anyone who has children, if you have nieces, nephews, stepmama, stepdaddy, whatever, you need to tell your kids, you need to share with them those stories so that they can learn about you. And through learning about you, they're learning about their culture. They're learning about them as who they are. So I think it's just as important for men as it is for women. And anyone out there who has kids, sit down with your children and tell them about yourself. They need to know why you are the way you are. Because like when I called my auntie that day and I was like, why is mama like that? And she was honest with me and said that my mom was spoiled. That shit, that was like boom, like a light bulb that went off because it made sense. And when she was telling me some things, I was like, oh my God, this makes sense.
of course.
And then I told her, y'all need to stop it. She's grown now. She got children. Stop spoiling her. But I did learn the things that I did learn. I learned from my aunties, and I'm so grateful that they were open and honest enough to share with me. And so when my nieces and nephews, when people come out, I'll sit down and tell them stories all day long. They have this podcast. They can go and learn about auntie.
And that's beautiful. It's an archive.
Yeah, and it's like I'm leaving them behind. They'll learn about their grandma. They're gonna learn some things that they probably won't learn from their parents. And I am grateful that God gave me the gift to be a storyteller so that I can leave something behind so they can go. So that's what I'm telling you all. Parents, write a journal, and leave it for your kids, even if there's things that you don't want to tell them about because you're embarrassed. Write a journal, leave a journal so that they can go and they can learn themselves about their history.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was going to add, because in the beginning I left off so many things. Another thing, podcaster. So I do have a podcast, Hot Almighty podcast. And on that podcast, one of my by far favorite episodes we did was me. Unfortunately, my co-host, her mom had passed away like that year before. But me and our producer, our mothers were both on the show and we interviewed them. And that was just like fantastic. You know what I'm saying? It's like just hearing both of them tell their stories, their perspectives. The show is about American Indian foodways and culture, and having them give that perspective from just, a regular, this is how we were raised and the things that we cooked, and it was like kind of second nature. My mom, prior to that, she had wrote a memoir. She shared that memoir with me. And just to your point, like you said, there's so many things that might come out in that situation that wouldn't come out maybe in a conversation. And that, for example, my mom mentioned growing up, going to powwows and things like that on a regular basis. She was born in Long Island. So I mentioned like the Shinnecocks, and she was like near that area, Shinnecock, Uncle Poospatuck Indians out there in Long Island. And, hearing that, and seeing, when I read that, it was like, okay, you know what I'm saying? Like I didn't even, like, it made sense. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You said that earlier. It made sense when she said it, like, oh, this is what you did? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I love just hearing the stories. Like when I hear elders speak, ancestors, or when I ancestors, pardon me, elders speak, and I sit at their feet and I just love, I just quiet, man. I just want to hear so much. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So
I
yeah,
feel
I
the
love
same way. I wish my aunties were still here because there's things that I still would love to sit and talk to them about. But I did learn a lot from them when they were here. So I don't,
it.
I don't have major regrets because I did take the time to sit down with them and they were open and honest with me and they shared. I love it because they had a sense of humor. And even when they did stuff that they shouldn't have done, they would tell me, they was like, girl, don't you go and do that. Now, this is what happened to me. Don't you go and do it. So I love it. So listen, um, one of the things that I really want to appreciate you for doing is you're sharing the Indian, as we call Indian, part of it, because you don't hear a lot about that. You hear about the slavery, you hear about the whites versus the black. We do hear about the people that came over, on the ships and they came and, decided to make lives here. Like you said, the Italians and all that, they all came over here, but we don't hear a lot about the Indians. So I really like that. So please tell us where, if someone's out there and they really interested in the Indian part of our history, where can they find you? And also tell them about your book, the book that
Okay.
you have out. Please tell them about your book and where we can find you if we want to, dig a little bit deeper into the Indian.
Got you, totally. I think one great place to go, and unfortunately, this is disclaimer because hackers, we all hate hackers. My Facebook account is hacked.
My face.
Yeah, my Facebook account is hacked, but it's still running and it still has all my content, which I shared just like reams and reams and reams of content. It became an obsession of mine. And I even had to have people tell me, like, oh, you should put watermarks on your stuff. You should, because people just were taking all the information and they were monetizing it and going out there and doing it. I didn't even care to turn it into a money thing. I was learning so much that I just wanted to share. And I just kind of like, so if you go to my Facebook, Damon Taylor, you go there, you'll see the copy of
Oh,
this
look at
book as my
this.
avatar, because you might see some other Damon
In
Taylors there.
our
All right.
family. Oh, love
In our
it.
family, right? In our family, Indigenous American Stories is the name of the book. So you'll see that book inside the avatar, but you can follow me there. Um, you can also go to author Damon Taylor on Instagram, and you can go to Damon Taylor on Clubhouse, okay, as well. If you go on Clubhouse, I'm often on there. I also have a lot of presentations that I've done on Clubhouse as well, so you can have some audio content. I'm reading documents, sometimes reading chapters of books, everything. So you can go through sometimes having debates with some people who are, open to debate and open to learning, and sometimes they're not. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
it's always entertaining. But you can find me there. Um, the book, I definitely want to take time and go back to the book. So yeah, this is the first book that I've come out with this year. We're working on a series,
Oh,
and
awesome.
this book is basically it came out of me doing a presentation for this organization called Destiny's Daughters of Promise, right? And I did a presentation about American Indian history to the young ladies who were in attendance. And the lady who I'm dating now, she works for that program and she also publishes books. So she happened to say one day, she was like, a lot of people have been telling me, hey, you should write a book, you should write a book, I had all this information. And she said, you should take that presentation and make a children's book out. And it was like, ding, 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 ding. You know what I'm saying? That's what
Awesome.
I should do. And this is what came out of it. So, it's basically me telling my sons our family stories and history and connecting it to the broader, the East Coast American Indian, the Eastern Woodland, let's use that term, the Eastern Woodland American Indian story. So again, as you see, if you look on the cover, I know so people can see what we got going on. But there's no
Well,
TPs
there's
on
some
it.
people that's just listening, so y'all
Right,
have to
I'm
go
letting
over
them know.
to the YouTube channel and look at it. But I'm gonna make sure it's in all the information is in the notes. And I think you also said Amazon has it as well for
It's
those
on
people.
Amazon.
So it's on Amazon, and the name
Yes.
of the book is In Our Family: Indigenous American Stories. So
Yes.
awesome. So you guys listen, I try to help anyone that's out there promoting anything, but this would be a great book for you to get for someone for Christmas, and they can learn different things, not just, what we see in the news, but this is something that we probably wouldn't have known to share with our children. So I think that's what we need to do is we need to support him and go out and buy the book, whether it's on Amazon, we'll go look for him on Facebook. So I'll make sure that information is there if you are curious. All right. Well, Damon, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for educating us and giving us a different twist on our history. So we appreciate you, and we're going to try to support you as best as we can.
No, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a pleasure. I've definitely enjoyed talking with you. Look forward to hearing about what surprises and discoveries you find looking up your family as you go along. But I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for having me. I look forward to coming back again if you invite me.
All right. Thank you.